Hey there, Beam staff. My name is Rick, and I am a digital fabrication specialist, and today I'm going to be walking you through bed leveling. In order to bed level, we're going to need the tools shown here, all of which are located inside the 3D printer maintenance kit. And we're going to be covering the following items in this video. Now before we level, we actually have to check to make sure that there's no material in the print cord, and as you can see here, there's actually a little burger of filament hanging off. And if you see this, which you will most of the time when you're leveling, you're going to need to scrub that off. Of course, this is easier said than done because this is essentially dried up filament, so it's like solid plastic. And in order to do this, we actually have to melt it and then scrub it off. To melt it, we're going to have to raise the temperature, so go to Materials and Print Cores, then go to Print Core 1, and then go to Set Temperature, and we want to shoot for a temperature of 220 degrees Celsius. And this will make sure that the plastics heated up enough for us to scrub it off. And you'll notice that the print cord turns red, which means it is heating up. Now before we start scrubbing this, I'd like to point out that the angle at which we scrub this is very important. As you can see here, a straight horizontal angle is very problematic. The print nozzle is actually in the shape of a cone. It's like a V shape, and if we scrub at the tip or straight horizontally, we'll actually distort the shape of the cone, which leads to not so good prints. So whenever we're scrubbing, we're going to make sure to scrub at an angle, or just like the cone shape. And as you can see here, you can actually switch the way you brush this, so you can do one side of the cone or the other side, and you can alternate between them, but as long as you don't scrub it straight horizontally, you should be good to go. And it's as simple as that. And when you're done scrubbing, go ahead and set the temperature back down to 0. And so one last thing to check is making sure that the bed actually has some play. So over time, when we are leveling this, the plate may be so adjusted that you actually can't move it anymore. And so what this tool does is it lets you check to make sure that the bed has some room to move around. And all you have to do is be able to insert the tool in between the glass plate and the metal bottom part. And if you can't, you need to move the plate down a little bit to give it some room. And this is the spot you would put the tool in case you didn't see it before. You can also see on the other side, this is what the slot would look like, and inserting the tool looks like this. And there's also one in the back, however, there is no designated slot, you're just going to have to fit it back there, but this is what it looks like. And now that we've done all that, we actually can start leveling. So from the main menu, you want to go down to System, and then you can click on Build Plate, and make sure you hit Manual Leveling. This will initiate the leveling process. And make sure to hit Continue when prompted to. And you'll see the plate prepare, the print carriage is going to move around, and then the plate is going to rise up. I also want to familiarize you with the 3 screws on the bottom of the build plate. There's one in the back, one on the left, and one on the right, and these are going to be used to help us level the bed. So this is the screen we're going to see next. As you can see, the instructions are pretty self-explanatory, but in order to level, we're going to level at 3 points: the back, the left, and the right. And this is going to happen twice. And you'll notice that the first go around, when you are leveling the back point, you can actually use the scroll wheel and move the plate up and down. And as it says, you want to move it until it's 1 millimeter away. Now, what is 1 millimeter away? Well, that measurement's kind of hard to have ingrained in you just off the top of your head, so that's why we have technology. And this is precisely 1 millimeter, give or take whatever the calibers are off by, but regardless, this is still a great reference. So let's get leveling. The leveling process is going to happen in 2 rounds. The first round is going to be eyeballing a millimeter, just like we talked about previously. For the back of the build plate, you're going to use a scroll wheel. However, we need to do each of the corners, and the corners don't actually go up and down with the scroll wheel. You have to use the adjustment screws. For the screws, if you turn them clockwise, it makes the build plate go up. If you turn them counterclockwise, it'll make the plate go down. And so for each of the corners, you want to get as close to 1 millimeter as possible. This is just an estimate. Don't worry, we'll go back and be more granular about this, so if you don't get it perfectly around your first time, it's not a big deal, so just do your best. Now it's time to use the brash shim. In order to use the brash shim, you want to put it on the plate, and then raise your plate up until the brash shim just touches the print nozzle, and then you want to move it back and forth. You're aiming for the feel of pencil on paper. And it might take you a little bit to find just the right spot or the sweet spot, so don't be discouraged if it takes you a little while to really get it down. But it should look something like this. And now on to our second round of leveling. It's going to look very similar to the first round, except this time we're going to be using the Brash sim. Unlike the first round, the back of the build plate actually doesn't go up and down the scroll wheel, so we need to use the adjustment screw in the back. But other than that, it's going to be a very similar process. But again, we're using the Brash sim, and we're going for the feel of pencil on paper. And just like the first round of leveling, we want to do each of the sides, so one in the back, one in the left, and one on the right. It's going to be a very similar process, and again, for all the sides, you actually have to use the adjustment screws, and you can't actually use the scroll wheel to rotate anything. And no worries if this feels weird or awkward to you the first couple times. This is a learning process, and practice makes perfect. Unless you're Drew, in which case you'll probably get it perfect the first time. Now, the only difference between this and the first round is that we're going to level with a Z-axis. This essentially just pops the second print core or second print nozzle, and it wants you to level with that plane as well. Pretty self-explanatory. Just as you're doing with the corners in the back, you want to use the Brash shim and make sure you're getting that pencil on paper feel. And doing this process, you're going to move the scroll wheel up and down to move the bed up and down. Now that we've finished leveling our 3D printer, we can feel accomplished, and it's also time to test our work. So after you're done leveling any of the beds, you want to run a bed level test. It's a quick 15-minute print. It only prints one layer, and what you're shooting for is firstly that the print doesn't fail, but more importantly that the sides are even and there's no apparent unevenness within the print, which would just result in one side being very light and another side being a normal color. In this video, we covered the following: preparing for leveling, which involved cleaning the print head, the actual leveling process, which was a few steps, as well as the aftermath, which is running a bed level test.